All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at Canada's immigration situation, and specifically this whole potential deportation crisis that seems to be brewing for 2025.
Right.
We're getting all of this from a video on YouTube by Canada Immigration.
Yeah.
And they're highlighting some pretty wild statistics and potential issues, so
Absolutely.
hopefully we can shed some light on this whole thing for everyone.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, I was blown away by the sheer scale of this.
Yeah.
We're talking nearly 5 million people.
Yeah.
5 million temporary residents potentially facing deportation.
Yeah. In the next 2 years.
In the next 2 years.
It's wild. It's students, workers,
Oh, wow.
people who are here on fixed-term visas.
Yeah.
It's a massive number of people. And just to highlight that even further,
Okay.
by December 2025, over 766,000 students alone
Wow.
will have their permits expire.
Okay, so I think before we go any further, we should probably define temporary resident, because I think some people listening might get that confused with like asylum seekers.
Totally. Yeah, it's really important to distinguish between the two.
Okay.
So temporary residents are here legally
Right.
with permits that have an expiration date.
Okay.
So that's, students, workers, visitors,
Yeah.
anyone who's here on a temporary basis.
Okay.
But asylum seekers, they're individuals who've come to Canada
Right.
because they can't return to their home country,
Yeah.
because they have a well-founded fear of persecution.
Okay.
So they're claiming asylum based on things like their race, religion, political opinion, or even their membership in a particular social group.
Got it. Okay, so temporary residents, these millions of people.
Yeah.
What happens when their permits actually run out?
Right, that's the big question.
Does everyone just pack up and leave, or is it?
Well, the immigration minister, Mark Miller,
Okay.
he's been pretty optimistic, suggesting that, he seems to think that many temporary residents will actually just choose to leave
Voluntarily.
voluntarily. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, do we think that's realistic, though?
I mean, it's hard to say
Yeah.
because a lot of these people, they came to Canada to build a life here.
Right.
And many of them are hoping to gain permanent residency.
Exactly.
So voluntarily leaving would mean giving up on those dreams.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You've been living here, you're working,
You've put down roots.
put down roots, maybe even started a family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not an easy decision.
It wouldn't be easy just to walk away from all that.
No.
So what happens if they don't leave?
Right.
Like, what's the plan?
Well, that's where things get a little bit murky.
Okay.
Because there's not a lot of clarity about what the government's plan is.
Really?
Yeah, and that lack of clarity.
Okay.
It's causing a lot of anxiety, not just for the people who are directly affected,
My bad.
but also it's raising questions about the capacity of the CBSA.
Okay, hold on. I think for people who maybe aren't super familiar with all this, maybe we should explain what the CBSA actually is.
Sure, yeah, so CBSA, that stands for the Canada Border Services Agency,
Okay.
and they're basically responsible for enforcing Canada's immigration laws.
So like border control.
Yeah, border control, visa processing,
Okay.
and unfortunately deportations as well.
Right.
But the concern is whether they're actually equipped to deal with the potential of having to deport millions of people.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a logistical nightmare.
It would be a huge undertaking, both logistically and ethically.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a really complicated situation.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And it raises a lot of questions about how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even if everyone did want to leave voluntarily,
Right.
just processing that number of people
On alone would be a challenge.
would be a massive challenge. But
Yeah.
we've already said, realistically, probably a lot of people aren't going to want to leave.
Right.
So
Especially if they've built a life here.
if they've been here for years,
Exactly.
does that mean we're looking at like CBSA officers rounding people up?
Well, the idea of mass deportations is definitely concerning.
Yeah.
However, we also have to remember that Canada has legal obligations
Okay.
when it comes to people seeking asylum.
Right.
We can't just deport someone who has a legitimate claim for protection.
Under international law.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that kind of brings us to another layer of complexity here,
Yeah.
which is the asylum system itself.
Right. Because the video mentioned that the system's already overloaded.
Exactly, it's really struggling to keep up.
Okay.
The IRB, the Immigration and Refugee Board,
Okay.
they're the ones who make decisions on asylum claims.
Right.
They're facing this huge backlog.
Okay.
There are just thousands of cases waiting to be processed.
Wow.
And the wait times can be years.
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 Wow, I can't even imagine.
It's a really tough situation. And it's made even more complicated by the fact that many of these asylum seekers are also temporary residents whose permits are expiring.
Oh,
so they're kind of stuck in this limbo, waiting for an asylum decision while also facing the possibility of deportation.
Okay, so just to recap, we've got temporary residents who are running out of time. We've got, it sounds like, a government that's kind of hoping everyone's just going to leave.
It seems that way.
But they don't really have a clear plan for what happens if they don't.
Not really, no.
And then we've got this whole asylum system that's already totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a recipe for chaos.
It's definitely a complex and concerning situation.
Yeah.
And the stakes are really high, not just for the people involved, but also for Canada's reputation on the world stage.
Absolutely.
The decisions we make in the next couple of years are going to have some serious consequences.
Okay, so let's dig a bit deeper into this whole asylum system. For people who might not be super familiar with it, how does it work?
Sure. So basically, when someone comes to Canada and claims asylum, their case is reviewed by the IRB. And they have to show that they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Based on those specific grounds that we talked about earlier, like their race, religion, political opinion, or being part of a particular social group. And this whole process, it involves interviews, hearings, legal representation.
Wow.
It can be quite lengthy.
So what happens while they're waiting for a decision?
So while they're waiting, asylum seekers are actually entitled to certain benefits. Things like shelter, food, limited health care, and the right to work.
So they're not just left high and dry.
Exactly. It's meant to provide them with basic support. While their claims are being processed.
But I feel like I've heard that there's some controversy surrounding those benefits.
Yeah, there are definitely differing opinions on this issue. Some critics argue that these benefits are too generous. And that they actually encourage people to make false claims just to get access to them.
So they're saying it's kind of like a pull factor.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But then on the other side, people who work with refugee populations, they really emphasize the genuine need for support. Pointing out that most asylum seekers arrive with very little.
I bet.
And they're fleeing some really desperate situations.
So it's kind of a balancing act.
It is.
You got to provide support for the people who really need it. But you also don't want to create a system that's easily abused.
Exactly. And it's a debate that's been going on for a long time. And there are no easy answers.
So we've got expiring permits, uncertainty about deportations, a struggling asylum system. What's the government doing to address all this?
Well, they have proposed some reforms. But they've been met with mixed reactions.
What kind of reforms are we talking about?
One of the proposals is to streamline the asylum process, hopefully to try and reduce those wait times. And make the whole system more efficient. And they've also talked about extending work permits. For international students. Who are facing permit expiry.
To try and keep people here.
Yeah, it's seen as a way to retain skilled workers. And address labor shortages in certain sectors.
Yeah, I can see how that would be good for everybody involved. But are these reforms, enough?
That's the big question. Critics argue that these are just kind of Band-Aid solutions. They're not really addressing the root causes of the problem. And they're calling for a more comprehensive overhaul.
Of the whole system.
Of the whole immigration system,
Wow.
One that creates more pathways to permanent residency. For temporary residents. And that ensures a more just and equitable asylum process.
So basically just fixing the system instead of putting a Band-Aid on it.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there's a lot of disagreement about the best way to move forward.
There is.
Is this whole thing just going to blow up in 2025?
It's definitely a possibility.
Oh, wow.
But it's not inevitable.
The
next 2 years are going to be really crucial. The government's actions, the public's response, all of these things are going to play a role in shaping the outcome.
So we're all just along for the ride.
Pretty much.
Well, this has been pretty doom and gloom so far.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about, the human side of all of this, because we're talking about real people.
Absolutely.
Whose lives are being affected.
It's easy to get caught up in the statistics and the policy debates. But at the end of the day, this is about people, families, communities. And the impact of all of this, it's going to be profound.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear about some of those stories. How is this actually playing out in people's lives?
Well, let's start by thinking about the emotional toll that all this uncertainty takes. on individuals and families. I mean, imagine not knowing if you're going to be allowed to stay in a country that you've come to call home.
Yeah.
The stress of potential separation from your loved ones.
Oh, yeah.
The fear of having to go back to a place where you might face hardship or danger.
Yeah. That's got to be really tough.
A huge weight to carry.
Yeah, and it's not just the emotional side of it either.
Right.
There's a lot of practical stuff, too. What happens to your job?
Your home.
Your kids' education.
Everything, yeah.
If you have to leave.
Exactly. It's like the
ripple effects are massive.
Massive ripple effect.
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget that when we talk about policy and stuff.
Right, exactly.
But the video does a good job of highlighting some real stories.
Yeah.
And there was one that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
This family had been living here for over 10 years.
Wow.
Kids born in Canada, they had this successful business.
Yeah.
And then just some technicality.
With their paperwork, and they're suddenly facing deportation.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it just shows you that these aren't just numbers.
Right.
These are real people with hopes and dreams and real connections to Canada.
Yeah.
And it raises those questions about fairness and compassion in the system.
Yeah.
Is it really fair to uproot someone after they've spent a decade building a life here?
Right.
Just because of a bureaucratic technicality.
Yeah, it makes you think that there has to be a better way.
Absolutely.
Like, mass deportations can't be the only option.
Right.
We were talking about those alternative solutions earlier,
Yeah.
like making it easier for people to get permanent residency if they're already established here.
Exactly, and that's a solution that a lot of people are advocating for.
Okay.
It acknowledges those contributions that these people have already made.
Right.
And offers them that chance at stability.
Yeah.
Instead of just viewing them as temporary, it recognizes that.
They become part of the fabric.
They become integrated into Canadian society.
Yeah.
And it seems like it would be beneficial for everybody.
Right. They get security. We get to keep them here contributing.
Exactly.
So what are the arguments against that?
Well, some people argue that it would undermine the integrity of the system.
Okay.
You know, potentially encourage more people to overstay their visas.
Oh, okay.
Hoping that they'll eventually get permanent status.
Okay.
And there are concerns about maintaining control over immigration levels.
Okay.
Making sure that newcomers have the right skills and qualifications that align with Canada's needs.
So again, it's like this balancing act. Trying to maintain a fair system.
Right.
But also recognizing that people build lives here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a complicated issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just about the individuals either.
Right.
We have to think about the broader consequences.
Okay.
Research suggests that deporting millions of workers could actually shrink Canada's GDP.
Wow.
Lead to labor shortages.
In important industries.
Yeah, in key sectors.
So you take millions of people out of the workforce.
Yeah, and the economies. It's about understanding the relationship between immigration, demographics, and economic growth.
Okay.
And recognizing that diversity and inclusion are actually strengths.
Not weaknesses.
Yeah, not something to be feared.
Okay, so while there are those concerns about making sure we're managing immigration levels, we shouldn't be scapegoating newcomers or overlooking what they bring to the table.
I need to base our policies on evidence and a nuanced understanding of the issue.
Absolutely.
Not on fear or prejudice.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential economic fallout. What about the ethical side of things?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of message does it send if Canada starts deporting millions of people who've been living and working here, building families?
It would definitely damage Canada's reputation as a welcoming and inclusive nation.
Right.
And it raises questions about our commitment to human rights and our obligations to people seeking refuge.
It's kind of like we're going against everything that we're supposed to stand for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I imagine it would make it harder to attract people here, too.
Right, if we're seen as a country that turns its back on people.
Who are contributing.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that Canada's history is intertwined with immigration.
Right.
We are a nation built by immigrants.
Exactly.
And our diversity is one of our greatest strengths.
So?
Turning away from that legacy would have consequences that go way beyond just the immediate challenges.
Right, absolutely.
It would be a rejection of our own values.
Yeah.
A betrayal of the principles that have made Canada what it is.
Okay, so things aren't looking great
It's a tough situation.
Yeah, we've got this deadline looming, a whole bunch of legal and logistical challenges, serious ethical concerns. Yeah.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
Is there anything in all of this that gives you hope?
You know, I think the fact that we're even talking about this, that this issue is being discussed so widely, is a positive sign. People are engaged. They're asking tough questions. They're demanding solutions. And that kind of public awareness and pressure is crucial
to making change.
For driving positive change.
Yeah, maybe this whole potential crisis can be a catalyst for some actual reform.
Yeah, I hope so.
For a more humane and equitable approach
absolutely
to the whole system.
I think by working together, by having these thoughtful discussions and advocating for compassionate solutions, we can create an immigration system that truly reflects Canada's values.
Okay, that's a great message. And it brings us back to those individual stories. The human faces behind the numbers.
Exactly. We can't lose sight of that. This isn't just about policies. It's about people's lives.
Their hopes, their dreams. That's what makes this whole thing so compelling, so important.
It's a human drama unfolding in real time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we continue this deep dive, I encourage our listeners to keep those human stories in mind. Because ultimately, the choices we make as a society will have a profound impact on people's lives.
Okay, so we've been focusing on Canada's internal situation. But this isn't just a Canadian issue, is it?
No, not at all.
It's a global trend.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Canada's situation is really a reflection of those broader global migration patterns. Driven by all sorts of factors.
Okay, so let's talk about those trends then. What's driving this increase in global migration?
Well, I think one of the most significant drivers is climate change. You know, as rising sea levels, extreme weather events, all of that displace communities. We're going to see more and more people migrating.
Looking for safer places.
Searching for safer, more habitable environments.
Yeah, and that's already happening.
It is,
I've seen stuff about those island nations that are literally disappearing.
Because of rising sea levels.
Yeah, it's scary.
And the projections are pretty dire. You know, by 2050, climate change could displace hundreds of millions.
Wow.
Even billions of people.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, it's going to put a lot of pressure on receiving countries. Both in terms of resources and infrastructure.
Okay, so climate change is a huge factor.
It is.
What else is contributing to all this?
Well, economic inequality is another major driver. People are migrating from countries with limited opportunities to those that offer better prospects.
For themselves and their families.
Exactly.
Makes sense. People are always going to want to have a better life. But how does that relate to
Canada?
To Canada specifically, and all these temporary residents.
Well, many of Canada's temporary residents come from countries where those opportunities are limited.
Or where there's political instability. Or conflict. That makes it difficult to build a future.
So they come here looking for work. A chance at a new life.
Exactly.
But as we've said, that temporary status makes things really precarious.
It does.
And it raises questions about Canada's role in this whole thing. Are we contributing to the problem by attracting all these workers without offering a real path to stay?
That's a tough question. And there's no easy answer. I mean, on the one hand, we have to acknowledge that there's potential for exploitation. We have to make sure that people are being treated fairly. But on the other hand, we also have to recognize that for a lot of people coming to Canada,
even temporarily,
represents a huge improvement in their lives.
So it's not as simple as saying Canada's good or bad.
Exactly. It's a much more nuanced than that. There's a lot of complexity and trade-offs.
And it's about having those tough conversations about how to create a system that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about climate change, economic inequality. Anything else we need to consider?
Well, political instability and conflict are major factors as well. You know, wars, persecution, human rights violations. All of these things force people to flee their homes.
Looking for safety.
Seeking safety and asylum.
And those are the folks who end up in that asylum system, facing those long wait times.
And uncertain outcomes. And unfortunately, I think those situations are only going to become more frequent,
right,
more intense as all of these factors converge.
That's a lot.
It is, but I
Yeah.
think even amidst all of these challenges,
Okay.
there's an opportunity for leadership,
Okay.
for compassion,
Right.
for innovative solutions.
Okay, so what can Canada do?
Well, first of all,
Yeah.
we have to recognize
Yeah.
that this is a shared responsibility.
Okay.
No one country can solve this on its own.
Right, it's a global issue.
It requires international cooperation,
Okay.
coordinated efforts, willingness to share the burden.
So what does that cooperation look like?
Right, well, one crucial step is to increase our support
Okay.
for humanitarian aid
Okay.
and development assistance
Right.
in those countries facing the biggest challenges
Okay.
by addressing those root causes of migration.
Okay.
We can help prevent displacement
Right.
and
Or-
create more opportunities for people to thrive.
In their own countries.
Exactly.
So it's a long-term solution.
It is, yeah,
It's about getting at the root of the problem. It's
absolutely.
not just reacting to it.
But we also need to take action now
Okay.
to help those who are already on the move.
Right.
And that means expanding our resettlement programs,
Okay.
streamlining the asylum process,
Right.
making sure people have access to basic necessities.
Right. So a two-pronged approach.
Exactly.
You deal with the root causes, and you also provide support for those in need right now.
And it's important to remember
Yeah.
that welcoming newcomers
Yeah.
isn't just a moral imperative.
Right.
It's actually in Canada's best interests,
Okay.
economically and socially.
Right. So it's not just about being charitable.
Right.
It's about recognizing that
Immigrants bring value.
they bring value to the whole country.
Exactly. They enrich our communities.
They contribute to our prosperity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's about creating a more welcoming environment
Yeah.
where they can thrive
Where they can contribute.
and reach their full potential.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about international cooperation, humanitarian aid,
Yeah.
resettlement programs, creating a welcoming environment.
Right.
But what can we do as everyday Canadians?
Well, one of the most important things
Okay.
is to educate ourselves
Okay.
about the complexities of global migration and the challenges that newcomers face.
Okay.
We need to challenge our own biases,
Right.
our preconceptions,
And approach it with empathy.
with empathy and understanding.
Yeah, it's about seeing these people
As real people,
as real people.
with hopes and dreams.
Right, just like us.
Just like us, yeah.
It's about engaging in those conversations.
Listening to their stories.
Yeah.
And advocating for policies that are fair and compassionate.
So it's not just about donating to charity.
It's about being actively engaged.
It's about getting involved.
Yeah.
Challenging your own assumptions.
Right.
Working towards a better world.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I believe that by working together,
Yeah.
by embracing our shared humanity,
Right.
we can create a brighter future.
Okay, that's a great message.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
it's been my pleasure.
It's been really insightful.
It's a really important conversation.
I encourage our listeners
Mhm.
to keep exploring these issues.
Yeah, to keep learning,
To engage in those conversations.
to advocate for solutions.
that reflect those values of compassion and fairness.
Exactly.
Until next time, folks.
Yeah, keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep striving to make the world a better place.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about Canada's immigration situation, this potential deportation crisis. And now we want to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture,
Oh, yeah.
the global context.
It's really important to remember that what we're seeing in Canada,
Right.
it's not unique.
Yeah.
It's actually part of these broader global migration trends.
So let's talk about those trends then.
Okay.
What's driving this whole thing?
Well, one of the biggest factors is climate change.
Okay, right. Yeah, we touched on that a bit earlier.
Yeah, and as those impacts intensify,
Right.
rising sea levels, extreme weather, environmental degradation,
Yeah.
we're going to see more and more people displaced,
Forced to move.
forced to migrate. Yeah, looking for safer places to live.
And we're already seeing that happening in some parts of the world.
Absolutely,
I mean, those island nations
Yeah,
that are facing the threat of disappearing completely.
because of rising sea levels, it's pretty scary.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah, and the projections are pretty dire.
Okay.
Some estimates suggest that by 2050,
Okay.
climate change could displace hundreds of millions,
Wow.
even billions of people.
That's just a mind-boggling number.
It's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah.
And it's going to put incredible pressure on those receiving countries
Yeah.
in terms of resources, infrastructure, everything.
Okay, so climate change is a huge factor.
Absolutely.
But what else is driving this?
But Economic inequality is
right.
another major driver.
Okay.
People are moving from countries with limited opportunities to those that offer better prospects for them and their families.
Yeah, which makes sense.
It's a natural human desire.
Right, to try to improve your life.
To seek a better life.
So how does that connect to Canada's situation then?
Well, many of those temporary residents that we've been talking about, they come from countries where those economic opportunities are limited.
Okay.
Or where there's political instability or conflict.
Right, so they're looking for a safe and stable place to live.
Exactly. And they see Canada as a land of opportunity.
But then they kind of get stuck in this temporary status limbo.
Right, and that raises questions about Canada's role in all of this.
Yeah. Are we part of the problem or part of the solution?
It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, we have to make sure that people aren't being exploited.
Right, that they're treated fairly.
That they have decent working conditions, access to services.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we also have to acknowledge that for many of these individuals, coming to Canada, even temporarily, represents a huge step forward.
Right, a chance for a better life.
Exactly.
So it's not as black and white as some people might make it.
That's much more nuanced than that.
Okay, so we've talked about climate change, economic inequality. What else is driving this global migration trend?
Well, political instability and conflict play a major role as well.
Yeah.
Wars, persecution, human rights violations.
Yay.
All of these things force people to flee their homes.
And those are the folks who end up
seeking asylum.
Seeking asylum, right, in places like Canada.
Exactly.
And facing those long wait times.
The uncertainty, yeah. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see more and more of that as all of these factors
kind of converge.
Come together,
It's a lot.
It's a pretty daunting picture.
Yeah, it is. But even with all of this, is there any reason for optimism?
I think so. I think amid all these challenges, there's also an opportunity for leadership, for compassion, for innovative solutions.
So what can Canada do?
Well, first and foremost, we have to recognize that this is a shared responsibility. No one country can solve this alone.
Right. It's a global problem.
It requires global solutions.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Well, it means working together with other countries.
Right.
Sharing the burden.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Well, one crucial step is to increase our support for humanitarian aid and development assistance.
Okay, so helping those countries.
Yeah, those countries that are facing the most acute challenges.
Right, trying to prevent displacement in the first place.
Exactly, by addressing those root causes.
Okay.
We can help create more opportunities for people.
To stay in their own countries?
To thrive in their home countries.
Right, so it's a long-term strategy.
It is, yeah, it's about tackling those underlying problems.
But we also need to do something right now.
Absolutely, we need to take immediate action. To help those who are already on the move.
Okay, how do we do that?
Well, that means expanding our resettlement programs. Streamlining that asylum process. Ensuring that people have access to those basic necessities.
Okay, so basic.
A two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
We address the root causes.
Right.
And we provide immediate support.
For those in need.
For those who are already here.
Okay, and I think it's important to remember, too, that welcoming newcomers, it's not just a moral thing to do.
It's actually beneficial for Canada.
In a lot of ways.
It makes economic sense, makes social sense.
Right, immigrants bring a lot to the table.
They do. They bring new skills, new perspectives, entrepreneurial spirit.
It's about recognizing the value that they bring.
Yeah, and creating an environment where they can succeed.
Right, an environment that's welcoming and inclusive.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture stuff. International cooperation, aid, all of that.
Yeah.
But what about us?
What about everyday Canadians?
What can we do to make a difference?
Well, I think one of the most important things we can do is to educate ourselves about the complexities of this issue, about the challenges that newcomers face. We need to challenge our own biases.
Right, our own assumptions.
And really try to approach this with empathy and understanding.
Yeah, it's about remembering that.
These are real people.
These are real people.
With their own stories, their own hopes and dreams.
Right, just like us.
Just like us, exactly.
So it's about having those conversations.
Listening to people's stories.
Right.
Advocating for policies.
That are fair.
That are compassionate.
So it's not just about donating money.
It's about being actively engaged.
Right. It's about getting involved.
It's about challenging those assumptions.
And working towards a better world.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's a great message to end on.
I also.
It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
I encourage everyone listening to keep learning about this.
Keep asking those tough questions.
To have those conversations.
And to advocate for solutions that reflect those values.
Of compassion, fairness, human dignity.
Absolutely.
All right, that's all the time we have for today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
We'll see you next time.